Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the brutal murder of Nikki Whitehead. This was a suggested case by Natasha, so thank you very much for that. I appreciate any suggestions you guys have. I'd just like to let you know, I mean no disrespect whatsoever to anyone I'm going to talk about today. I've just gathered this information off the internet and compiled it into a video for educational purposes. Jarmecca Yvonne Whitehead, who was more commonly known by literally everyone in her life as Nikki, and for the purposes of this video that's how I'm going to refer to her as, was born on the 18th of April in 1975, and she lived in Conyers in Georgia in the US. Now, Nikki was a mother of identical twins. I believe she had them at around about the age of 17. And Nikki's childhood wasn't really that great of one, I believe. From what I've read, she was actually born in prison, and when she became pregnant, she really wanted to give her daughters a different childhood. She didn't want them to kind of have the childhood that she had. But at the time, she was very, very young. She was about 17-year-old. And I don't really know the circumstances behind it, but their great-grandmother would actually take care of them for a lot of their life and kind of raise them. And then the mother would try and claim back custody of her daughters. But like I said, I don't really know the circumstances surrounding that. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because she was just so young and she felt like they would kind of have a better life with her grandmother. I'm not sure. Anyway, her twin daughters were called Jasmine Kenesha Whitehead and Tasmaya Janisha Whitehead, and they were both born on the 27th of November in 1993. The girls were actually very well known as Taz and Jazz, and she utterly adored her daughters, and she was generally such a good mother. She tried so hard for them. She would put them into dance classes, ballet classes, piano classes, tennis classes. They attended Girl Scouts. They pretty much did anything that they wanted to do. She, like I said, she wanted to give them a totally different life to what she'd had, a childhood as to what she'd had. The girls would also attend church frequently and were just generally really well brought up and really well mannered girls. On the 13th of January in 2010, County Sheriff's Deputy Al Irwin was on patrol like he normally would do when he saw two girls at the side of the road kind of frantically trying to wave him down in a sense, so he pulled over. They were desperate to get his attention. They seemed really distressed, and when he pulled over he found out that it was Jasmine and Tasmaya, and they told him that their mother had been murdered. He immediately called for backup. He put the girls in the back of his car and he drove them back to the gated community where they lived. Two main detectives attended the scene, Detective Swift and Detective Dunn. And they were actually the first people to enter this house. And in a sense, you can call it a house of horrors because what they walked into was just so disturbing. The scene that they were greeted with was so gruesome. So they went on to say that there were literally pools of blood everywhere. There were trails of blood as if the body had been dragged. And obviously it smeared all the blood behind it, leaving the trails. There was blood spatter literally everywhere. It was all over the furniture, all over the walls, the ceilings, just everywhere. And as you can imagine, that must have been such a horrific scene to actually walk into. There were tables overturned, vases all smashed, and again, they were all covered in blood. Detective Swift even literally said that as soon as he walked in, so obviously you could see the blood everywhere anyway, but he could smell it, which, just imagine how much blood there must have been in that room for you to literally be able to smell it in the air straight away. He said that it smelt like this wet kind of rusted metal, and it just went to show how brutal the attack must have been. For the entire place to be covered in blood like that and for it to physically smell like blood just kind of gives you guys an idea of how bad it was. They began to investigate, obviously to try and find the murderer. It was clear to the detectives that Nikki desperately fought for her life. She didn't just let someone come in and murder her. She battled brutally to the death, basically. Unfortunately, she did lose the battle, but she really, really didn't just let whoever it was just take her down. She fought fiercely in her own self-defense. The authorities pretty much straight away thought that this was a personal attack on Nikki. She was found in the bathtub and she had 80 stab wounds to kind of her neck and chest area, and some of them were so extreme that her actual spinal cord had been severed. She had several stab wounds around her jugular, and there was evidence of reinsertion, so they'd stabbed in the same place kind of a few times as well. But really, she most likely would have died long before all 80 blows were given, maybe, I don't know, around 10 or 20. And this person, whoever it was, just carried on attacking her. They just carried on stabbing her. She ended up with 80 in the end. And so it seemed like it was done in a personal rage because of this, because they just simply carried on long after she was dead. So the initial suspect was her fiance, Robert Head. Nikki had actually met Robert in the year 2000. He was this 55-year-old trucker at the time, and it wasn't actually very long before Nikki and the girls moved in with him. He was described as this really nice guy who absolutely adored the girls. He adored his little family, and he did raise the girls like they were his own children. But the thing was, Robert wasn't in town. He left town that morning, and now he wasn't answering his phone. So obviously that was very suspicious to the police. Not only did they want to speak to him to find out, obviously, where he was, what his alibi was, but they also had to inform him that Nikki had been murdered, because either he did it and he was running away, or he didn't have a clue, he'd not done it, and he didn't even know what fate had befallen her. So either way, they really wanted to speak to him. They brought in forensics into the house, and they noted that the doors and the windows were all firmly shut. There was literally no evidence anywhere of a break-in, so Nikki must have known who her attacker was. She either let them in willingly without a struggle or anything like that, or it was somebody that was already in the home. So pretty much it was very unlikely to be a robbery or anything like that. There was no sign of forced entry or anything. Nothing really seemed to be missing, so they were going along those lines of inquiry. So in this house, like I said, it was covered in blood, but there were some clean areas. There's gonna be, but they were very few of them. Like I said, it was just everywhere. And when they sprayed luminol on these areas, which is an agent that forensics use to try and detect if blood is being cleaned up. So they sprayed it on these clean areas, and they found that it actually had blood there, and somebody had tried to clean it up. And on many of these surfaces that they sprayed this on, they found that blood had been cleaned up off these surfaces, which I found really, really bizarre. The house was covered in blood. It was everywhere. They were even kind of hard pressed to find these clean spots in the first place. And when they did, they weren't clean spots. They'd actually been an attempt to be made to clean it up. But whoever did that left everything else. They weren't actually trying to cover up what they'd done, because they left the house covered in blood everywhere. So why did they try and clean up those spots? It was just very, very weird. Whilst they were searching the house, they also sent out these teams to canvass the neighbourhood and things like that and see if anyone had seen anything. They went door to door, knocking on people's houses to try and interview everyone. They approached the next door neighbour, and they found that the wall had this spot of blood on it. And when the neighbour answered, they questioned as to how this spot of blood had gotten there. And the neighbour actually said that they were in bed and they heard this knock on the door, but they didn't answer it. And this was when police noticed that this person had a security camera, so they got the footage off that and they took it to the station to review it. He allowed them to do so. And when they did review it, they found that unfortunately it was actually facing the wrong way, so it wasn't helpful in this case whatsoever. The police literally had no evidence to tie the neighbour into Nikki's murder apart from this, like I said, little blood spot on the wall. So they began looking elsewhere to her daughters. They took them to the police station and they put them in this room, which was being recorded, audio recorded and visually recorded. And they just kind of let them sit there and talk for a little bit. And one sister was very distressed whilst the other was really, really trying to comfort her.
Mommy! You gotta be strong, Jay. You got to. Because I'm gonna make sure they find the person that did it.
They began questioning as to what had happened that day. What were their actions that day and what had they done? So they said that they had gotten up and got ready for school. They left the home at around 8 AM. They went to get the bus, but the bus had gone, so they'd missed it. So instead, they decided that they were going to walk to school. They got to school at around about 8:30, I believe, and they made it just in time for the first class, and they attended all of their classes that day, and then they went home. When they got home, one of the girls entered the house first, and she saw that there was a light on in her bedroom. So she goes over to turn this light off, and that was when she hears her sister screaming, and that was when they found the mother dead in the bathtub.
Mommy! went to her room, and I seen the blood all in there on the floor. And I went in there and I seen her and I touched her.
Now, instantly, that doesn't make sense to me. As I said, the crime scene was all covered in blood. As soon as you walked in that door, you could see the blood. It was everywhere. There were pools of it. It was in the carpet. It was on the wall. Just everywhere. And they were trying to say that they didn't see any of it. The first twin who had gone in to turn off this light would have literally had to go in with holding her nose and her eyes closed to not be able to notice any of the blood because it was everywhere. And not only that, the detective that went in later on could smell it. So why couldn't they? And why couldn't they see it? I just found it just so bizarre, and I truly didn't understand that myself. Anyway, that was when they went outside and they tried to get help and they flagged down the deputy. The police continued their questioning. They were asking if their mother had any enemies or had anybody in her life that wanted to hurt her or anything like that, and the girls couldn't think of anything, but they did mention that she had this secret boyfriend. Her fiance didn't know about him, and his name was Joe Carter. The girls actually said that they heard their mother and Joe arguing on the phone, and she was telling him not to come to her house. So this was when the police had kind of these two main suspects. They had Robert, who they couldn't get hold of, who was potentially a very, very jealous fiance, and they had Joe, who was now potentially a very jealous boyfriend. The police still couldn't get hold of Robert, as I said, so they looked into getting a hold of Joe. They went around to the barber's that Joe worked at, and it was very late. The shop was all closed up, but there was these men standing outside. So they went over, they asked if they knew of Joe Carter, where he was, had he gone, etc. And the men were very uncooperative. And that was when Detective Swift just came out with with regard to the murder of Nikki Whitehead. And that was when one man's face just completely drained of colour, and it just dropped, and you could just instantly tell that that man was Joe. They took him in for questioning to try and find out where he was around the time of the murder, and he stated that the previous day Nikki had come to his house around about 10:30, and that was when he told her that he didn't want to be with her anymore. They argued and things like that. She was absolutely furious, and then she stormed out, and that was the last time that he said he'd seen her. They looked at the surveillance tapes around the building. They found that Nikki did arrive at 10:31 like he'd stated, and she went on to leave at 11:01 p.m. So he was telling the truth about that, but that didn't mean that he didn't kill her. So he was requested to do a polygraph test, which he agreed to. He took the test, and as he were waiting for the results, the police asked him if he was willing to kind of take off some of his clothes, because as I said, the attack on Nikki was brutal, and she fought back. So whoever her attacker was would have been covered in bruises, covered in marks, scratches to say the very least, because she tried very hard. She fought for her life. So they asked him if he'd be willing to undress, and he did. He took off his jacket and his shirt and things like that, and he didn't have a mark on him, not one. And then when his polygraph results came back to say that he was telling the truth, that was when Joe Carter was ruled out as a suspect of Nikki Whitehead's murder. They moved back to Robert, trying to contact Robert, which again, they couldn't get hold of him still. It was actually 24 hours later when they finally did manage to get hold of Robert. They told him about Nikki's murder, and over the phone, he genuinely did seem shocked. But once more, that's not proof that he didn't murder her. People can act, especially on the phone. Obviously, you're not seeing the facial reaction, you're not seeing anything, it's just the tone of the voice. He claimed to be hundreds of miles away at the time driving his truck. That was his job, that was what he's supposed to do. What I don't get about this was they were struggling to get hold of Robert, but once he said that he was away driving, they contacted his company and they got his GPS locations. So why didn't they do that in the first place? I'm not sure whether they have to get certain permissions or something like that. Maybe that was the case, and once they got permission off Robert, they were allowed to do so. I don't know, but if they would have got these GPS locations, they would have found that yes, he was miles away at the time of the murder. But at the same time, Robert's truck was out there, but he might not have been the one driving. What if he had hired somebody to drive his truck and he had actually stayed behind and murdered Nikki? They dug a little more into the GPS locations and they found that the truck actually stopped at a gas station at Shelbyville in Indiana. They contacted the station, they got the footage from the security cameras, and on the footage you can clearly see Robert's face. He was definitely the one driving the truck. Robert Head was 550 miles away, at the time of his fiancée being brutally murdered. And so he was ruled out as a suspect too. The police were kind of back to square one. They had no other suspects, they had no real leads. So they set about kind of checking any other cameras or anything like that in the area around her apartment. A detective actually spotted a camera that was opposite her estate on a Shell garage, and so they tried to get the footage from that. They got this footage, they watched it around about the time of the murder and things like that, but they didn't see anything. It wasn't until they took it to after her actual murder at around about 10 AM that they see two figures, two girls, and these girls were identified as the twins. They walk up to this person who's filling the car up with gas. They speak to this person, they get in the car, and then the car drives away. This car is very distinctive. It has blue sides and a white bonnet. And it wasn't long after they put out this description of the car that it was found in the next town over. The car belonged to a middle-aged man called Robert Leonard. They obviously questioned Robert, and he stated that he was just fueling up his car when these two girls approached him. They asked him for a lift to school. They said that they were running really late, that they'd missed the bus, and if he could drop them off. He agreed to this, and he took them to school, which took him around about 5 minutes. I believe they were very skeptical of the story, so they went on to get the footage from the school. They began it at 8 AM, which is when the girls were supposed to start school. Like I said they didn't arrive till 8:30, so they carried on watching it. 8:30 comes around, the girls are still not come. There was just no sign of them. They continued to watch. Maybe they were a bit later than that, maybe they got the times wrong, but they still didn't arrive. They didn't actually arrive until 10:16 AM, which was when Robert Leonard's car pulled up into the car park and out got the twins. So Robert Leonard was telling the truth and the twins were not. The police brought them back in for questioning, and it's worth noting when the girls arrived they were both wearing this black jacket and black gloves, both of them. It wasn't cold whatsoever in the station. They would have been actually quite warm in those. I know some people like to wear things like that anyway, but they wouldn't take them off. They just wore them all the time, and the police did note that. And as I said, her attackers would have been covered in bruises. So it's just a bit of a side note to kind of put here. So just kind of bear that in mind as it's going on. The police just told them straight they didn't get to school until after 10, so they were lying about something. That was when they changed the story. They said that they actually overslept that day and they got to school really late. Now the police are obviously suspicious. They're asking them, why did you lie? Why did you make up the story? Why didn't you just tell the truth if that was the truth? And that was when they changed the story again. They then said that they'd had this big argument with their mum that morning, and something like that's very important. Their mother had just been murdered. Why did they not think it prudent to tell the detectives that they'd had this big argument with her that morning? The police quickly kind of changed the tactics. They separated them both and interviewed them separately using kind of these interview tactics to try and make them crack, to try and see what they said, whether what they said was different once they'd kind of got into the more intricate details, whether their stories still lined up. They then reunited them and they told them kind of everything that they'd both said that differed. That was when their demeanour instantly changed. They went from these sweet, innocent, grieving daughters to these manipulative, very hostile girls. As I said, they were acting more and more suspicious, and the police wanted to check them like they did with Joe Carter. They would have, if they'd kind of participated in the attack, they would have had these bruises and scratches. And like I said, they were concealing their arms and their hands with this unnecessary clothing. So that was separated again. They were asked to remove their gloves and jacket, which they did. And when they did, they were covered in scratches, bruises, bite marks, and there were just so many wounds indicative of an attacker trying to attack somebody and the victim acting in self-defense.
Your hands and your arms. What happened here?
I got into a fight.
Did you get in a fight with her?
Upon inspecting the bite marks, they found that the two front teeth had this gap in them, which matched Nikki's teeth. Her two front teeth had a gap in them. The twins became prime suspects immediately. Eventually, these teeth marks were tested against the impressions of Nikki's teeth, and they were a match. So they went back to the house. They tried finding any evidence that would sort of directly link the twins into the murder. And what they found was this kind of diary. It was a diary that had 2 sets of handwriting in, and it was, the girls used to use it to kind of talk to each other secretly, I guess. So one would write something in on one side and then the other would reply on the other. So one twin actually wrote, "We gotta get rid of her," and the other wrote, "She gotta go ASAP." They were arrested on the suspicion of their mother's murder. They bundled them into the back of the police car, and the girls were so angry. They were furious that they'd been caught. One of them even said, "Bite marks, can you believe it?" Like, they were gobsmacked that the one reason they'd been caught was the bite mark. They just didn't seem to show any remorse or anything for what they'd done. I guess they couldn't believe that it was something so minor that had got them caught, but that is what forensics and all this testing is for, to try and get these murderers on these minor things, to try and match them to the crime that they'd committed. Anyway, they got back to the station, and that was when they finally admitted to what they'd done. They said that they'd been arguing with their mother for weeks, and on that fateful day, they got up late for school, and Nikki was very, very angry.
Like waving the pot around and things like that or whatever. And so I guess she trying to hit us with the pot. You know, she just threatening us and everything. Yelling.
Everybody's yelling.
We all we mad.
I had took the pot from her. This one she had grabbed and I kind of turned like you said, "Get back," but she didn't keep the knife in her hand.
My mom is winning that battle with the knife or whatever. So I picked up the pot and I hit her with the pot.
The twins became angrier and angrier, and this led to a fight. Jazz hit Nikki over the head with a pot, and then Nikki apparently bit Jazz, kind of in self-defense, and that is when Taz jumped in. I did read that Nikki ended up grabbing a steak knife, probably to try and defend herself, but somewhere along the lines, one of them must have wrestled this steak knife off her because Nikki ended up getting stabbed.
She bit me in the chest. Like I said, I'm not that big, so when she bit me, she latched on to me, and I'm trying to get her off of me because it hurts. I'm trying to punch her, I guess, and I think Taz stabbed her. She stabbed her.
They gouged and scratched at each other, and everyone was very, very angry. It was then reported that at some point Nikki left the house. She went to seek help from the neighbour, which is probably where that blood spot came from. She knocked on the door, there was no answer, and so she came back into the home. Maybe at that point she either believed that her daughters couldn't do anything more to her, but she'd already been stabbed, so I don't understand that. Maybe she was going back in to ring the police. I don't know the reasoning behind going back in the house, but Taz and Nikki went and sat down in the kitchen, and then eventually the fight continued, and it ended up with their mother lying on the floor with 80 stab wounds, blood everywhere because of the fierce battle. The girls even said in the testimony that she was on the floor, we were all on the floor in the end.
I was stunned. I think I picked up a knife and I stabbed her. They wasn't cuts like they were deep because I couldn't bring myself to do it.
That was when the twins then grabbed her body, they dragged it to the bath, they put her in the bath, and they left her there.
You had her by the hands,
Yeah, I think I was at the top.
and Jazz had her feet.
It was she was heavy.
And what did y'all do?
They put her in the tub.
They cleaned up a little bit, and then they left for school. The only reasons that I could think of them possibly cleaning up a little bit was that maybe there was some damning evidence to lead to them. What if it was a footprint or something like that? You can match a footprint to their shoes. Maybe that's why they cleaned up. Maybe that section was their blood. There was blood everywhere, so I don't know how they would have known that that was their blood unless they knew specifically that they had a cut on their hand, say, and they'd put it there and they tried to clean that up so that it wouldn't get tied back to them. I don't know. I'm probably wrong, but it's just an idea as to maybe why they cleaned up. Another idea is that maybe they intended to try and clean it up and it was too big of a job. They realised that they couldn't do it and so they left. Or they'd started and then looking at the time, they realised that they'd have to get to school for their alibi so that they wouldn't be under suspicion, and so they just left. I mean, we just don't know why they tried to clean up this blood. We just know that they did. The twins did plead not guilty to a murder in 2010, but then in January of 2014, Taz pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. The following month, so did Jazz. They were both sentenced to 30 years to be served in separate prisons. It did come out as well that the relationship with her mother was very rocky. She adored them, but they would kind of resent her in a sense, I guess, even though she did absolutely everything for them. They were raised, as I said in the beginning, by their great-grandmother, Della Fraser, and that was until 2007, when their mother sought custody of them. Again, I don't know the reasoning behind that, but she tried to get them back. The father wasn't present at this time. I believe he was in Africa or in a different country or something like that. So the girls fought a lot with their mother. Physically and things like that. It ended up with counselling. It ended up with juvenile court appearances. Police were called to Nikki's house on numerous occasions where her daughters had attacked her and things like that. Nikki seemingly gave them everything that she could. They had these closets full of designer clothes. Their hair was always done immaculate, and they had this really good home life by all accounts. Shortly after, Della was given custody again, only to have Nikki take it back again on the 5th of January in 2010. The girls apparently protested this decision. Nikki had always given them the world, and now as they were kind of getting older, getting teenagers, getting boyfriends, things like that, she had started to say no more. She actually ended up ringing the police on one occasion when one of her 14-year-old daughters had snuck out to go and meet the 17-year-old boyfriend. Because she wouldn't allow it, they just left anyway. So it was things along the lines like that of her actually saying no more and being a bit more strict, because for their own safety, they didn't like it. They wanted to move back with the grandmother where the rules were more relaxed. However, the court ordered them to live with their mother for a 2-week trial basis. Nikki, at the age of 34, was killed on the 13th of January in 2010, just 8 days later, by her 2 16-year-old daughters. So yeah, this case was just totally insane. From what I could find online, I truly do think that Nikki just adored her daughters. She wanted to give them the world, and she was just trying to kind of make up for lost time in a sense when they were living with the grandmother and build this relationship with them. And because she didn't want them to go down the wrong path or have a childhood like she did, she kind of brought these rules in to try and keep them safe. And they didn't like it. They were becoming more unruly, more rebellious. They used to fight her a lot. And I don't know, it just ended in such a brutal way.
I'm sorry, miss her, but it was not what Linda and all of them try to make it seem. I didn't hate her. I didn't hate her either. It just was built up. I don't know, I guess heat of the moment just built up anger between all 3 of us.
It's just so tragic and horrific what actually happened to Nikki when all she tried to do was protect her daughters. So yeah, that's the end of the case. If you guys have any suggestions you'd like me to look into, let me know, and of course I'll look into them for you. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to see similar content videos. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the murder of Nikki Whitehead. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.